We're beginning trying to record some of these. I know some folks would like to hear these and hear our study of Mark, and I just want to kind of make that available to folks, especially, you never know if someone's going to feel sick or something. So I think it'd be good if we can get these, have these recorded just in case something like that happens. Oh yeah, there should be a copy of 13 back there. Yeah. Lesson 13, Mark 13. Let's put this phone on silence. Usually Wednesdays are pretty quiet, but at the same time, the phone sometimes still wants to act up. Uh, but if I can just locate, there we are. Do not disturb. In Mark chapter 13, we're seeing Jesus specifically prophesy concerning a couple of different things. First of all, he's going to talk about the destruction of Jerusalem. You can read Matthew chapter 23 and part of 24 for a little more detail on that, as well as Luke as well. Luke 21, I believe, has a lot of information, a lot more details on some of these things. But in the first part of Mark 13, most of Mark 13, he's focusing on prophesying concerning the destruction of Jerusalem. After that, then, he's going to talk about the destruction of the world. And we can see that there's a divide here between the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the world. As we begin Mark 13, looking at verse 1, it says, "And as he went out of the temple, one of his disciples saith unto him, Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. And Jesus answering, said unto him, Seest thou these great buildings? There shall not be one or left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat up on the Mount of Olives over against the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign when all these things shall be fulfilled? And Jesus answering them began to say, Take heed, lest any man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and shall deceive many. And when ye hear of wars and rumors of wars, be ye not troubled, for such things must needs be, but the end shall not be yet. Verse 8 continues, For nation, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be earthquakes in divers places, and there shall be famines and troubles. These are the beginnings of sorrows. But take heed, he says there in verse 9, take heed to yourselves, for they shall deliver you up to councils, and in the synagogues ye shall be beaten, and ye shall be brought before rulers and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them. And the gospel must first be published among all nations. But when they shall lead you and deliver you up, take no thought beforehand what ye shall speak, neither do ye premeditate. But whatsoever shall be given you in that hour, that speak ye. For it is not ye that speak, but the Holy Ghost. Now the brother shall betray the brother to death, and the father the son. And children shall rise up against their parents, and shall cause them to be put to death. And ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. And so in the underline there, on number 1, the blank, the signs leading up to Jerusalem's destruction. That's what he's getting at here in this particular section. The disciples pointed out the temple's fortified strength, if you will, here in verse 1. Look at all these buildings. This is a strong fortress, if you will. And they're pointing it out to him. This temple particular was built by Herod. Of course, you read, of course, the destruction of Solomon's temple in the earlier in the Old Testament when you're reading Second Kings and Second Chronicles. You read about Jerusalem and the temple being destroyed. There's some prophecy concerning that in the major prophets. But what you're seeing here then with when they came back, you have Nehemiah and Ezra, and they're going to have the temple rebuilt. But then what you're going to have kind of in between the testaments is Herod is going to kind of give a remodeling, if you will. He's going to redo the temple and do a bunch of different things to it. And so this would be considered Herod's temple at this point in time. But Jesus responded to them pointing out all this strength, if you will, fortified strength in the temple by saying that all the buildings would be torn down. What? That's what the disciples probably have going through their heads. What? Are you serious? You think about this. This Jerusalem, the temple, this was the image, if you will. It was the place, I should say, where the Jews would go to worship. This was considered their house of worship. This was, that they would, Jews would often, if not always, make a special effort to go there to Jerusalem, at least once in their life, and probably more times than that, depending on which Jews you would come across. But I mean, this was a special place. And now Jesus is saying that's going to be torn down. Here's the center of focus of worship, and it's going to be gone. It's going to be torn down, not one stone left upon the other. Think about that. This is going to be utter annihilation of the temple he's talking about here. And the disciples were surprised. And they asked the Lord when this was going to happen. Again, verses 3 and 4. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives over against the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign when all these things shall be fulfilled?" When's this going to happen? When is the destruction of Jerusalem going to occur? Or in the destruction of the temple specifically? Well, of course, Jesus, we see that first of all, I'm almost getting ahead of myself. The disciples, the temple in Jerusalem were places of worship. It was the city where the Jews who was faithful to the law of Moses would come several times in their lifetime. But what he does here, the Lord points out several things that were supposed to lead up to the destruction of Jerusalem. And we were in the book of Acts, and we saw some of these things that were occurring. For example, false Christs would arise, verses 5 and 6. He talks about how there would be false Christs that would come and try to mislead people. And we see it's recorded, or at least alluded to, in the book of Acts, chapter 18, verse 2. We have a false Christ. At least it's alluded to. What had happened was, and you got to apply some of what a historian named Suetonius wrote. He lived about 69 to 122 AD. He references a man by the name of Christus, which is a different way of spelling the name Christ, at least in the a Gentile form of saying that, or a Roman Empire, how they may have spelled it. But the guy named Christus, a guy claiming to be Christ, had risen up and was leading the Jews to do riots in Rome. And so we read about Caesar expelling the Jews from Rome. Well, we see that reference in Acts 18, verse 2, when it talks about specifically that one married couple, Aquila and Priscilla. And they had been in Rome, but they were expelled from Rome. And so they were in Corinth at that time. So it references that a little bit. These things you see kind of alluded to and referenced in the book of Acts. Again, likely this Christus was one of the false Christs who had risen up during that time. We read about wars and rumors of wars would come, yet not yet the ends. You read and pay attention to Matthew's context. That's talking about the end of Jerusalem, the end of the temple. You see, they're asking about that. When's the temple going to be destroyed? That's not yet the end of Jerusalem. Yeah, there's a bunch of false Christs coming up, but that's not yet the end. There's going to be wars and rumors of wars. That's not yet the end. The Jews, the Zealots, were constantly at odds with the Roman Empire. And there'd be all kinds of stuff going on. There'd be issues with the Samaritans as well that would rise up. And yet, that's not yet the end. Natural calamities would come. He talks about there in specifically verse 8, he says, "For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There shall be earthquakes in diverse places, and there shall be famines and troubles. These are the beginnings of sorrows." Famines. We read about a famine in the book of Acts. in Acts chapter 11, verses 27 through 30. Could someone read that for us? Acts chapter 11, verses 27 through 30.
But the Satirians was more persuaded by the pilot and the captain of the ship than by what was being said by Paul.
Acts 11, 27 through 30. Is that next?
Backwards. Instead of 11.
Oops.
These are 11 between.
Yeah, Acts 11, 27 through 30.
And in these days, the disciples from Jerusalem and to Antioch, and there stood one of them named Agabus, and signified by the Spirit that there shall be great dearth throughout all the world, which came to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar. Then the disciples, every man according to his ability, determined to send leave unto the brethren which dwelt in Judea, which also they did, and sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Saul.
And so we see it says dearth. That's the idea of a famine. There's a famine going on. A famine is a food shortage. And so we're reading there that, like, well, a food shortage. Oh, no. Disciples, if Jesus isn't telling them about this, oh, no, is a famine, a food shortage? Is this a sign of the end of Jerusalem? Is this the sign of when the temple's going to be destroyed? Well, no. You see, it's just something that's leading up to that.
The word dearth mean?
I believe so. I'll have to double check that. I can be corrected on that, but it's basically the idea there is the same. But again, it's the idea of a famine going on here. And they're going to be, he mentions that there in verse 9, the beginning of verse 9 again. But take heed to yourselves, for they shall deliver you up to councils. And it says, and in the synagogues ye shall be beaten, and ye shall be brought before rulers and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them. That's verse 9. Just look at this. You see this all throughout the book of Acts. Acts chapter 4, what happens? Peter and John were arrested. And what happened? They were brought before a council. And they told them, don't preach anymore in the name of Jesus. What happens in Acts 5? Acts 5, similar situation. They're brought before the Jewish council, and they're not only that, but they're flogged, it says. They're going to be beaten, basically, for what had happened. You read in Acts 16, Paul was beaten. In Acts 24 through 28, we see Paul appearing before kings. He's going to appear before King Herod, and then he's going to appear before Nero. Of course, that doesn't describe what happened. It just says he's awaiting trial by Nero. But we see all of this. Rulers. He's before Festus. He's before Felix. He's before a lot of different people. And so we see this stuff that's going on in the book of Acts, leading up to Jerusalem's end. Verse 10, of course, says the gospel must first be preached to all nations, or published to all nations, the King James Version says. And of course, by 60 to 62 AD, I think we see that that's exactly what happened. Someone read for us Colossians chapter 1 and verse 23. And this all depends on the date of when Paul wrote Colossians. Some people say it was 59. Some people say it was 60, 61, 62. Somewhere within that time frame.
If indeed you continue in the faith firmly established and steadfast, and not moved away from the hope of the gospel which you have heard, which was proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and which I, Paul, was made a minister.
Notice that. By 62 at the latest AD, Paul says that the gospel has reached the whole world. Think about that. It's been proclaimed to all creation. Think about that. This is about 30 to 33 AD, somewhere in that vicinity, when Jesus says that the gospel needs to be preached to all the nations. And this is going to be when the church is established. You know, he's going to be established here within about 50 days, a little less than, a little bit more than 50 days, actually. Uh, Less than 2 months. So it's going to be the same year that this happens. And yet it only takes from 30, 33 AD all the way to, at the latest, 62. So just a little bit more than 3 years, or a little bit less than 30 years, close to 30 years, and the gospel spreads to the whole world. Think about that. That's amazing to think about right there, but that is what needs to be, that's what needs to happen first. You see, before the destruction of Jerusalem, the gospel has to reach all nations. And by Colossians chapter 1, verse 23, again, somewhere in the vicinity of 60 to 62 AD, Paul says that's happened. So that's the time when they need to be like, okay, we need to be watching now. And of course, we see by 66, 4 to 6 years later, that's when the destruction will happen. But as you keep reading on here, again throughout the outline, again, Holy Spirit would be given the apostles utterance in their time to make a defense. That's verse 11. That's what happened Acts 24 through 28. That's what happened Acts 4 and Acts 5. The family would betray family. That's what's being described there. There'd be Christians that would betray Christians, and not only that, there'd be family that would betray their fellow relatives because they became Christians. You see that's all what's going on there. And then in verse 13, and ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. All men. What happened in about 64, 65 AD? Who knows what happened in those particular years? Maybe 63 when it happens. What happened with Nero in Rome? Nero set fire to Rome, and he blamed it on the Christians. And so if people believed Nero, guess what? They're hated by all nations. They would be hated by all nations. They burned the capital of the empire. At least that's the accusation, is what I should say. The Christians are being accused of burning the capital of the empire. That would cause people to be hated by the whole world. That would cause Christians to be hated by people in the Roman Empire if they believed what Nero said. And so again, that's why I say might be a reference to Nero setting fire to Rome and blaming it on the Christians at this point. Again, all hated by all men for my name's sake by that point. And so again, got to keep an eye out. These are all the things that are being brought about before Jerusalem's destruction. Any questions or comments on that? You move on then into specifically verse 14. It says, but when ye shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let him that readeth understand. Then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains. And let him that is on the housetop not go down into the house, neither enter therein to take anything out of his house. And let him that is in the field not turn back again for to take up his garment. But woe to them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. And pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, but in those days shall be affliction, such as was not from the beginning of the creation, which God created unto this time, neither shall be. And except that the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh should be saved. But for the elect's sake, whom he hath chosen, he hath shortened the days. And then if any man shall say to you, lo, here's Christ, or lo, here, he is there, believe him not. For false Christs and false prophets shall arise, and shall show signs and wonders to seduce, if it were possible, even the elect. But take ye heed. Behold, I have foretold you all things. But in those days, after the tribulation, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then shall he send his angels, and shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from the uttermost part of the earth to the uttermost part of heaven. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When her branch is yet tender, and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is near. So ye in like manner, when ye shall see these things come to pass, know that it is nigh, even at the doors. Verily I say unto you, that this generation shall not pass till all these things be done. And so now he's talking about here in this section here, the destruction of Jerusalem. This destruction would take place over a period of about 5 years, about 66 AD to 70 AD. Again, the gospel, we have a timeline here I've listed for you. The gospel preached to the whole world, Colossians 1:23. And so after that, then the end of the end of Jerusalem would come, the end of the temple would come. We see the gospel preached to the whole world. First army would surround Jerusalem not that long afterwards, 66 AD, under a man by the name of Cestius Gallus. The city was attacked but not destroyed. The historians who record that have stated that what had happened was he was attacking the city, and he could have just completely wiped out everyone then. He could have just completely wiped out Jerusalem right then and there, but for some reason, which he didn't even say, he just turned back. I don't know if that was, maybe God's mercy allowing people to escape or what, but it just says that for some reason he drew back. The second army surrounded Jerusalem in 68 AD under Vespasian. Not much happened then. And then, of course, in 70 AD, the third army surrounded Jerusalem under Titus, and the city was attacked then and completely destroyed. You add all these things together again, the destruction of Jerusalem took about 4 to 5 years in total, from 66 to 70 AD. And so it is speculated that some Christians who did not make it out at that first battle may have made it out after the first siege in 66 AD. That's what some Christians who lived kind of in the following years after this, the following decades, kind of I want to say the 100s, maybe early 200s, possibly. Folks who were living at that time, Christians, and those who were specifically who were falling into the heresy of Catholicism, they would write that the people who were living there in Jerusalem, if there was any Christians left after that first attack in 66, they made it out after that battle, after that skirmish, you might say. Then, of course, we read throughout this the abomination of desolation. When you're looking at this specifically, Daniel even prophesied of Jerusalem's destruction, which is interesting because Daniel was living in the days when Jerusalem had already been destroyed by Babylon. Now, of course, Babylon was, of course, destroyed, and then you had the Persian Empire come in, the Medes and Persians come in, and they would destroy Babylon. But Daniel's living a time when he's already seen, if he was living in Jerusalem, he would have already seen the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem on his way out, being brought into captivity in Babylon. And so he's already seen a destruction, but he's prophesying of another destruction. Just think about that. The abomination of desolation. Someone read for us Luke 21, verse 20. Luke 21, verse 20. Luke is going to tell us in detail what that destruction was.
But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, you recognize that her desolation is there. Contemplation is there.
Yep. And so we see right there, the army was the abomination. Jerusalem was considered the holy place. Someone reads, Matthew's account, it says that when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, some people think, well, that's talking about the temple. Well, it's not talking about the temple. That was talking about Jerusalem, you see. And so all those armies surrounding Jerusalem, you see, all those armies, that's an abomination. Abomination, by the way, means Uh, at its very core, it means something stinks. When you look at the word itself, it's a stench. You think about it from this perspective. When you get a whiff of danger, that's kind of what's being discussed here. When you get a whiff of the destruction coming, the stench of destruction. When you have that stench of destruction, what's that sense of stench of destruction? Armies surrounding Jerusalem. You see, that's what that's talking about there. But you just keep looking on. People need to flee Jerusalem and the surrounding area when when the army surrounds Jerusalem. Verse 15, let's actually read verse 15 through 18 again. It says, "And let him that is on the housetop not go down into the house, neither enter therein to take anything out of his house." Why not? Why shouldn't he go down to get his cloak or get his things? Why can't he just pack up right then and there? If you have an army surrounding Jerusalem, you got time to pack?
No.
No.
Go with the clothes on your back.
Yeah, exactly. You got to leave with the clothes on your back. Verse 16, let him that is in the field not turn back again for to take up his garments. Well, why can't he, if he sees the army, run over to Jerusalem, grab his cloak, and leave? He doesn't have time. Exactly. You look at this next one. But woe to them that are with child, pregnant women, those that give suck in those days, those that are women that are nursing. They've got to carry a baby, try and get them out of Jerusalem in all of this, you see. If there's any Christians there that are mothers, that are nursing, that are pregnant, they're going to have a difficult time trying to get out of this place, try and get out of there. You keep reading on then. This is the worst destruction that would ever take place on earth, according to what Jesus said in verse 19. For in those days shall be affliction, such as was not from the beginning of the creation which God created unto this time, neither shall be. The worst destruction to ever take place on the face of the earth is essentially what he's saying. And Josephus actually would record this. I've got a record there in your outlines of what he wrote in Wars of the Jews. Wars of the Jews. He focuses so much in that on the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, some of the earlier parts of his writing there are focused on other times, but a good hunk of it focuses on Jerusalem's destruction. And it says the multitude of those that perished exceeded all the destructions that either men or God ever brought upon the world. And he ought to know. He was there. He was there. He was with the Roman army. They say, at least the historical records that I've come across, they state that Josephus was there with Titus, watching all this go on. You see, he's a witness to those things. For the sake of Christians, the persecution would not be permanent. Again, verse 20, and except that the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh should be saved, but for the elect's sake. The elect, that's Christians he's talking about there. We read that in places like Romans 8, and that's talking about Christians, the elect, whom he hath chosen, he hath shortened those days. What he's getting at there is that the persecution was not going to continue on and on and on and on until every single Jew is wiped out off the face of the earth. If that's what God could have done, to punish the Jews for persecuting Christians, for killing Christians, for persecuting the church, for killing Christ, for killing the prophets that came speaking of Christ and persecuting those prophets. That's what could have happened. But for Christians' sake, for the sake of Christians not having to go through that kind of heavier persecution, the Lord would shorten that. You see. Any questions or comments on that? Yeah.
Kind of reminded of what Paul says and some of what Jesus says, but Paul reminds us that our battle is not against flesh and blood.
Yeah.
And Jesus here is telling the people to flee.
Yeah.
Not take up arms and fight the Romans. And that's what they do. We see them do it. Not all of them are able to get out. If you look at Josephus, he estimates a little over 1 million people
Yeah.
lost their lives during that time period. Now, You may wonder how is so many people in Jerusalem at the time,
Yeah.
but history kind of leads us toward the fact that Rome was smart. They waited until Passover
Yeah.
when there had been a lot of people there, and that's
Yeah.
when they began to come in, and so they were able to wipe out a third of the people that was there in Jerusalem at the time.
Yeah.
And it also points us toward what Jesus tells Pilate, and that is that my kingdom is not of this world.
Yeah.
Word my servant would fight. Jesus does not want us risking our lives and giving up our lives for earthly kingdoms, for
Yes.
soil. Right. He tells his people to flee. Right. Not to fight the Romans, but to flee.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you even think about it, something else that comes to mind, something I forgot to mention, before all this went down, there was a bunch of zealots that entered Jerusalem and said, if you don't join us, we're going to kill you. Josephus doesn't even know how many of those were killed that refused to join up with the zealots. So it could be well over a million, could be well over 2 million. But you're right, that's what Josephus mentions through the Roman destruction. That's what happens. Was 1 million were killed. Who knows how many of the zealots on top of that would kill. And again, that all goes back to this fact. The thing about this, these are the apostles. Over and over again, they keep not understanding. Throughout the book of Mark, we've seen this. Over and over again. They cannot get it through their heads that Jesus' kingdom is not earthly. I mean, you're seeing them argue over who's going to be greatest in the kingdom. You're seeing them thinking that it's going to be, again, an earthly kingdom where they basically beat back the Roman Empire. You see some of that through here, throughout Mark's account. You even see it in the other gospel accounts. But now I think this is that time when they're finally getting it kind of bluntly told to them, a little more bluntly. Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. No earthly kingdom's going to be here. There's not going to be any kind of earthly kingdom. So that's, I think, that's finally something that they're going to have to understand. Because again, they're looking at the temple buildings. Look how fortified this is. Look how great this is. And yet Jesus said that's going to go away. You see, their mindset is focusing on the physical. Look how powerful, Jerusalem looks. And Jesus said, no, that's all going to be destroyed. Any other questions or comments on that? Yes.
We have a tendency today to do that as well. We try to make Christianity synonymous with patriotism or the American flag or
Yeah.
party.
Yeah.
It is not.
Yeah.
Right. The book of Revelation is clear that there is no earthly nation that is going to survive.
Yeah.
They are all against God's nation.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. People kind of look the same way when they look at how big a church building is. Like, oh, look at how big that church building is. I could tell you of some congregations, they're sound, but they do have buildings that are super massive. They're still sound, but they're, the building's all super massive. But, at the same time, if you look at a building that's super massive, who cares? That doesn't tell you anything about, if the church is sound. There's institutional brethren that have lots of large ones. There's Baptist churches that are so big. I mean, I could tell you of one that's so big it has its own school building. It has its own just various buildings back where I used to live. But anyways, again, so much focus on the physical and not on the spiritual. That's what the issue was. And then of course, he points out in verses 21 through 23, and then if any man shall say to you, lo, here's Christ, or lo, here he is, or he is there, believe him not, for false Christ and false prophets shall arise, and shall show signs and wonders to seduce, if it were possible, even the elect, even Christians. There's going to be people that are false Christ, people that are false prophets, who are going to rise and try to get Christians to join in with them. And it says, but take ye heed, behold, I have foretold you all things. Josephus records this in Wars of the Jews. The false prophet made a public proclamation in the city that God commanded them to get up upon the temple and that there they should receive miraculous signs of their deliverance. All those people died. Those people that got up on the temple died. They didn't make it. That was a false prophet. Again, looking at all of this, he's talking about things that were going to happen there, and they happened just as he prophesied, just as he said they would happen. You keep looking on here, verses 24 through 27. Basically discussing a subject of complete and utter destruction. 24. But in those days, after that tribulation, after all those zealots have done things, after the Roman Empire has done its due, done what it needs to do to the nation of Jerusalem. In those days after that tribulation, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then they shall send his angels, and shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from the uttermost part of the earth to the uttermost part of heaven. This is talking about a complete destruction of Jerusalem and the Jewish nation. And that's exactly what happens. Some think that this is a description of the end of the world. That's not the case at all. What this is it's a prophetic rendering. It's not the end of the world, but it's basically kind of like saying it's going to feel like the end of the world. It's going to feel like the end of the world to the Jews when they see their Jewish nation come to an end. I mean, look at some of these passages. Someone read for us Isaiah 13, verse 10. We see sun, moon, and stars all failing. This is a prophetic expression of divine judgment taking place. Not something specifically, you have to pay attention to context, but it's not something that would be talking about the end of the world all the time. Again, someone read for us Isaiah 13, verse 10.
For the stars of heaven and the constellations will not flash forth their light, the sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shed its light.
And then who's that prophecy concerning? If you look at the context. Isaiah 13, Isaiah 13, who's he prophesying against? Destruction of Babylon is what he's talking about. You go over to Isaiah 34. Isaiah 34, looking at verses 4 and 5. Isaiah 34, 4 and 5. What does it say there? All the host of heaven will wear away, and the sky will be rolled up like a scroll. All their host will also wither away, as a leaf withers from the vine, or as one withers from the fig tree. Look at that. Destruction. Destruction of the stars, destruction of the sky. Is this the end of the world? Look at verse 5. For my sword is satiated in heaven. Behold, it shall descend for judgment upon Edom. Some others might say Idumea. But it's Edom. Look at that. That's God's destruction, a proclamation of destruction on Edom, not talking about the end of the world, but Edom as a nation. Look at Ezekiel 32, 7 and 8. Ezekiel 32, 7 and 8. Someone read for us Ezekiel 32, verses 7 and 8.
And when I extinguish you, I will cover the heavens and darken their stars. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon will not give its light. All the shining lights in heaven I will darken over you, and I will set darkness on your land, declares the Lord God.
According to verse 2, who's that talking to? Is that talking about the end of the world? Who's this prophecy for? He says in verse 2 of that same chapter, Son of man, take up a lamentation over Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Again, this was a proclamation of judgment against Pharaoh. This was not a proclamation of judgment on talking about the end of the world. Again, these are prophetic expressions of divine judgment. God bringing judgment on a nation. It's going to feel like the end of the world to these nations that he's talking about. That's what he's getting at here. The nation of the Jews would suffer divine judgment. It's going to feel like the end of the world. If America were to suddenly end, we would probably feel very similar to, it feels like the end of the world. We would feel that way. If anybody in Canada, if that happened to Canada, they probably feel the same way. If it was the end of Canada, they would feel like it's the end of the world, and things like that. Any questions or comments on that? Looking at verses 28 and 29 then, it says, Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When her branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, ye know that the summer is near. In other words, there's signs. When you see those leaves coming up, that means summer's coming. There's signs. So ye in like manner, when ye shall see these things come to pass, know that it is nigh, even at the doors. The destruction of Jerusalem is nigh. When you see all these signs, Jerusalem is about to end. The temple is about to be destroyed. Verily I say unto you that this generation shall not pass till all these things be done. That's the key phrase to understand through all of this. This generation. What generation? The generation of those he's talking to. The apostles. The apostles, some of those apostles lived to see that destruction take place. Now, Paul didn't. He died. He would be, according to tradition, killed. Peter didn't. He would be, again, according to tradition, killed. But you had other folks like John, the apostle. Possibly some of the other apostles did. James, the Lord's brother, might have seen it. But James, the apostle, the brother of John, he was killed long before this. He was killed back in Acts chapter 12. But again, that generation would not be gone, would not have passed away until all those things took place. That's how you know that this was a prophecy concerning things that were going to happen in their time, not our time. A lot of people point to this passage and they say, no, no, no. This is talking about the future, way far ahead future, 2,000 years into the future. No, this is talking specifically about back during their day, the destruction of Jerusalem, you see. That generation would not pass away until all things took place. Now, we're not going to get into this next section very far because we're running short on time, but I do want us to think about this next verse, verse 31. This is how we know that there's a divide here between what was going to happen in their time and what he's going to talk about in this next section. He says, Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. But of that day, what day? What day is he talking about then there, verse 31 and 32? Of that day and hour, no man knoweth. He said there's going to be signs towards the destruction of Jerusalem. You'll know that it's coming. There's signs. The fig tree gets its leaves before the summer. There's a sign that summer's coming. Heaven and earth shall pass away. Of that day and hour. In other words, when the world is destroyed, of that day and hour, when heaven and earth pass away, of that day and hour, no man knoweth. No signs. You see, there's a divide here. Whereas there was the destruction of Jerusalem, that would have signs. Here with the destruction of the world, there would be no signs. And so this is not, again, this is something prophesying of the end of the world here. You see, that's a passage that is prophesying of that. Any questions or comments on that? Yes.
I don't remember which one of Joe Stevenson's writings, but he and a couple other first century writers mentioned some strange going ons in the sky.
Yeah.
Some what they would call comets that look like a sword.
Yeah.
Would come to Jerusalem, I think, for several months, if not a year. And he mentions how many people didn't see the signs, didn't notice the signs, that Daniel prophesied about, and that Jesus mentions here when he talks about the stars will be falling from heaven. Right, so he mentions some of these cosmic signs here. And for me, some of the things we have to try to wrap our minds around is he says in verse 26, so this is prior to talking about the destruction of the world. He says, Then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of great power and glory. Right? So he's again talking to that generation. He says they will see the Son of Man in the clouds, in the sky.
Mhm.
So we have to ask, is that those comets that Josephus writes about? What is those things that he's talking about here? These people would see Jesus in the clouds, that generation would.
Yeah, that could be possibly referring to that. Yeah, very good thought there. Any questions or comments on any of this before we close tonight? Want to thank everyone for coming here this evening.